Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Simon Wootton, leader of Rochford District Council. I'm pleased to open this virtual webinar public engagement session, which will focus predominantly on the Rochford pre-application part of the Council's asset delivery programme. Can I extend a warm welcome to members of the public who have given their time to join us this evening. Although it feels very different to a physical meeting, we've become used to virtually working over many months. So in the circumstances, this is the best medium possible. I'm pleased to introduce Mike Davis, Chairman of Rady Town Museum Management Group, who will be chairing this evening's meeting. I'm really grateful to him for giving up his time and the interest he is showing in the Council's asset development programme. Mike is a long-standing and very well-respected resident within the district, and he is passionate about the community and heritage across the district, but particularly in Rady. I'm delighted that so many people have joined the webinar. You are invited to ask questions using the web chat facility. At long last, it is a pleasure to be able to discuss the plans and share in the vision. I emphasise, however, that they are just plans at present, so feedback is not just welcomed, but vital to help shape the final plans. We want to hear what people think. The meeting will be recorded and shared for those who are unable to attend. And at this point, I'd like to hand over, if I may, to Mike Davis. Mike, over to you.
Thank you. My thanks to Councillor Simon Wootton, the leader of Rochford District Council, for that most generous introduction. We have a number of presentations this evening in this first of two such webinars relating to the 6 sites across Rochford as part of the Rochford District Council Asset Delivery Programme. Tonight, we are going to concentrate on the Rochford plans, whilst on the 17th of March, please make a note in your diaries, we are then going to concentrate on the plans for the Rady sites. However, it is important to note that all 6 sites are part of the overall package, so we are happy to take questions on any aspect relating to the whole project. All questions and the responses will be available to view on both the RDC website, and please feel free to ask any relevant questions, whether in support or not of these proposals. You are welcome to submit questions during this presentation or indeed afterwards, and similarly for the Rady presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the RDC and Voyage websites. It is planned that this presentation will take in the region of 1 hour. I will now introduce the panel who will be presenting the detailed information and who will then give responses to the questions we have already received to date and any others that we receive this evening. First, I would like to welcome and introduce Angela Hutchins, who is the Acting Managing Director for the Rochford District Council. We have Matt Harwood-White. Now, Matt is the Assistant Director for Assets and Commercial for Rochford District Council and the Senior Officer responsible for this asset delivery programme. I'd now like to introduce George Farley to you. George is from GB Partnership and is the Programme Director for the Voyage programme. GB Partnership are the private sector delivery partner selected by RDC under a competitive tendering process to lead on the Voyage programme. GB specialise in public sector partnerships and development programmes. And finally, I'd like to introduce Peter Buist to you. Peter is from Purcell Architects and is the lead architect for the programme. Angela will now speak on the background to this asset delivery programme, the project to date, how you can contribute with your views ahead of the final plans, have your say, and the website, and how all 6 sites dovetail into the overall plan. Angela, I'll pass on to you.
Thank you very much, Mike. So by background, we first began this conversation internally when we were discussing what to do with the two event sites, which were at the time within the council's leisure contract with Fusion Lifestyle. So that's the Freight House in Rochford Town and the Mill Arts and Event Centre in Rady. We already knew that event sites were becoming a bit of a financial problem for councils across the country. And for us, 20 years ago, when the leisure contract was first let, they were the mainstay of weddings, parties, and entertainment. But over the last 2 decades, that market has changed, and more venues are available for public hire. And with better facilities, the Freight House and the Mill Hall were looking pretty tired and were struggling to compete in that marketplace and were uneconomic to run. So we looked at the rest of our real estate owned by the council, predominantly the Civic Suite in Rayleigh and the council's offices in Rochford, and we noticed a number of recurring themes. Primarily, they were all ageing buildings which were in need of significant updating, not just in terms of bricks and mortar, but also in terms of electrics, mechanics, and technical to bring them up to modern standards. Things like broadband, Wi-Fi, and projection equipment, for example. They were expensive to heat, to light, to operate and maintain, and they were particularly limited with opportunities to green or become more environmentally sound. They were also heritage sites, which limited the scope for widespread updating, and they didn't work as modern spaces. For example, the Porter Cabin reception at South Street is cramped and unwelcoming, and the Great Eastern Room in the Freight House is troubling if you acoustically, if you want to use it as a large space. We also noticed that the sites were underutilised for their space. That didn't mean that they weren't well used, but it meant that they were too big and unsuitable for most of their users. So a large performance space was very often used by a group that's probably about a fifth of the size that the room could actually accommodate. There were more singular desk spaces than we needed at South Street, but not enough meeting rooms or collaborative spaces. And the fixed furniture of the council chamber was so restrictive that it's virtually impossible to use that space other than for council meetings, and the rest of the time the room sits empty. The hireable space at Freight House and Mill Hall was limited and, as I say, often too big or too small for most ordinary events. So booking capacity was limited and the commercial model therefore was uneconomic. He did some work to look at our options for reconfiguring that estate. And that was the OBC, the outline business case that we presented to council back in January 2019, so 2 years ago. That document looked at a number of options, but the bottom line was that doing nothing was not an option. It would be more expensive to do the basic maintenance and repair than to actually reconfigure the whole estate and do something new with our buildings. We wanted to take the value from all 6 sites within the programme and reinvest them to create a cost-neutral civic space, which would be a legacy for the future and which residents could be proud. Members identified that they wanted a new community centre for Rayleigh, and so we agreed a model which would invest additional spend in that site to get something really special. But it was important to us that it should be a community centre, not an events centre. An event centre is relying on a commercial operating model to fund it. What we wanted is a space for the community to use with a not-for-profit ethos. We wanted to create a space which would maximise use by the community and which would also house our partners, RAVs, Citizens Advice and Oaks. Could you have the next slide, please? Yes. So the council identified a solution which it believed was its preferred option. And following that procurement process that Mike mentioned earlier, we identified GB Partnerships as our development partner. And working with GB Partnerships, we want to create civic buildings which are environmentally and financially sustainable for the future, maintain community facilities in Rochford and in Rayleigh, maintain accommodation for our partners in Rochford and in Rayleigh, and are true to our heritage settings, creating 21st century civic spaces with state-of-the-art technology to future-proof their use for the community and for a legacy. So a lot of work has been gone into to get the project to this state, to enable us to share something with you which is more than just conceptual. to provide you with sufficient detail to ask questions, to understand the proposals and to offer feedback. But I want to remind everybody that no planning application has yet been submitted and no formal council decision has yet been taken to proceed. So when we say that we are asking for your feedback to help shape the next stage of the project, we mean it. Could I have the next slide, please? As it says on the slide, the information we're sharing tonight is a snapshot of the planning submissions which we're putting together to give you an idea of how our plans are progressing. They've been through the rigor of working with planning colleagues and are on policy or above policy. And so we know that they are buildable and we know that the work has been done to make sure that they are achievable. Tonight, we're focusing on the Rochford sites, and next month we'll look at the Rady ones. But I do want to make the point that the funding of all of the new civic buildings is only possible because of the whole programme approach that we're taking. These are not individual sites. This is one programme which cross-funds itself, save for the additional cash injection for the new community centre. Can I have the next slide, please? So we will do all this over again on the 17th of March when we'll be specifically addressing the Rady sites. And as Mike says, that doesn't mean you can't ask questions about that tonight, but because we are taking a programme approach, so of course it's relevant. But please be assured that we will specifically focus on the Rady sites and in particular the Mills Hall next month. Thank you, Mike.
Good. Thank you, Angela. I'm now going to hand over to Peter Buist, who's going to give our next presentation, and he's going to give specific details of the designs, the core principles, and the importance of our heritage relating to each of the three Rochford sites in what will be the longest presentation this evening. Over to Peter. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So good evening. Yes, my name is Peter Buist, and I'm an architect from Purcell. We're a practice of architects, master planners, and heritage consultants, and we specialise in working with buildings and sites that have conservation and heritage constraints. We've been working with GB Partnerships and Rochford District Council for approximately 18 months, analysing and understanding the existing sites and developing outline proposals for their future. Whilst I'm an architect, I am presenting on behalf of a team of consultants that have been engaged on these projects, including many specialists such as civil, structural, and building service engineers, heritage consultants, tree specialists, and ecologists. I'll now provide an overview of the work that we have undertaken to date across the three sites in Rochford, including the project objectives, the opportunities and constraints of each site, and the principles of our concept designs. The designs on each of the sites are at an early stage of development, where we have established outline concept proposals. I'll start with the Freight House and then move on to 3 to 15 South Street and finish with number 57 South Street. So starting with the Freight House. The Freight House is to become a brand new civic and community hub, representing a forward-thinking 21st century council set upon the foundations of a rich and proud history. Next slide, please. This new community hub will serve the communities of Rochford and the surrounding district, delivering administrative, civic, and operational services within a welcoming, accessible, customer-focused, and safe environment. The existing building offers a wonderful opportunity to create a facility that reflects the rich history of Rochford. Through its sensitive adaptation and extension, we can also create a sustainable, efficient, and modern building that fulfills the community's expectations of the council's services. The Freight House will continue to provide versatile and flexible space for many community, public, and private events. Indeed, the three existing function rooms will be modernised in order to best cater for the wide variety of local events. Next slide, please. Next slide, thanks. The Freight House is a late Victorian red brick building with a sloping roof and projecting bays to the west elevation that mark out the various entrances to the building. The freight house lies along a north to south line and is a large building that sits on top of the grass bank that looks onto Bradley Way. Bradley Way is a busy road into and around Rochford, and therefore the freight house is highly visible to those coming in and out of the town. Whilst its industrial heritage is still clearly evident in its external appearance and the internal plan arrangement, there have been some less sensitive adaptations and additions over the last 40 years. Our proposed refurbishment of the building is an opportunity to rectify these late 20th century alterations with more sensitive changes. Next slide, please. Located opposite the railway station and above the busy road, the freight house is a gateway site for Rochford. It is locally listed and located within the Rochford Conservation Area. Proposals must therefore be sensitive to both the building itself and the historic character of its surroundings. To the east is Rochford Reservoir, creating a wonderful setting for the building and an opportunity for public and civic events to spill out into the adjacent parkland. The building itself is sunken below the level of the car park that surrounds it to the north, west, and south. Conversely, a steep grass bank drops down from the building's east elevation to meet the parkland and footpath that goes around the reservoir. Next slide, please. Thanks. To accommodate the council's brief, the existing freight house needs to be extended. We explored a number of options for the form, location, and size of the extension. These included new extensions to the north, west, and south of the existing building. Locating the extension to the south of the site allows the historic freight house to remain visible from Bradley Way and maintains the important link with the railway station. The extension will also benefit from being close to the reservoir and parkland to the east. Through a new master plan for the site, the project is an opportunity to improve the immediate setting of the freight house, which benefits accessibility and functionality. Next slide, please. The proposed new extension will be 2 stories high and has many similarities to the existing building. The new extension will accommodate the council's administrative functions. Office spaces, meeting rooms and breakout areas are located across the ground and first floors and will be flexible, providing various types of working areas for individuals and groups. Enclosed meeting pods will be provided for more sensitive and confidential meetings. An open double-height atrium allows people to move about the extension with informal social breakout spaces and lovely views over the nearby parkland, trees, and reservoir. A new lift will ensure the building is fully accessible to all staff, visitors, and public. A glazed atrium separates the new extension from the existing freight house building, clearly defining the new and old elements of the building. This glazed atrium will be the new public entrance, providing a wonderful arrival space which will make it easy to find your way around. The existing freight house will accommodate the civic functions, with a new council chamber being created within the large central hall. When not required, the chamber will be dismantled and stored to enable the large hall and the other 2 function rooms to be used for many other public and private events. The function rooms will be supported by modern kitchen and catering facilities. Bars and serveries and secure storage will also be provided. The function rooms will be enhanced to control sound so that they best accommodate the wide variety of uses, as well as stopping noise coming out of the building during louder evening functions. Each function space is independently accessed so that events can be held at the same time without disturbing each other. Next slide, please. So in summary, the proposals approximately double the overall gross internal area of the freight house, albeit the footprint of the new extension is smaller due to the more efficient use of space across 2 stories. The 3 existing function rooms within the Freight House will be retained and modernised to accommodate a wide variety of public and private events, including the installation of the council chamber. The new extension will be modern, a flexible working environment, accommodating agile working practices and providing a wide variety of individual and collaborative working environments. Careful selection of materials, high levels of insulation, renewable sources of power, heating and ventilation, and car charging points will all ensure the building is constructed and operated as environmentally sustainably as possible. The project is an opportunity to create a truly unique public building for the communities of Rochford and the surrounding district. Next slide, please. A short walk from the Freight House is the site at 3 to 15 South Street. The relocation of council services to the Freight House provides an opportunity to undertake a development at 3 to 15 South Street that restores the existing historic buildings and secures their future through conversion back to residential use. Next slide, please. The regeneration of the site will deliver high quality and affordable housing that will support and strengthen the wider town centre community in Rochford. The timing of the development will be carefully programmed with the Freight House to ensure council services continue to be delivered safely, whilst also delivering housing that meets local needs within a timely fashion. In addition, the development will retain, conserve and enhance the existing listed buildings and heritage assets on the site. Next slide, please. Numbers 3 to 15 form a continuous frontage onto the east side of South Street. Predominantly 2 and 3 stories in height, the buildings contribute strongly to the character of the street, which is also in the Rochford Conservation Area. More modern late 20th century additions that are 1 and 2 stories in height are present to the rear. Whilst the buildings along South Street form a continuous row, each plot is distinct in the way it looks on to the street, which reflects their former uses as individual houses. Next slide, please. The site includes 4 separately listed Grade 2 buildings and is also adjacent to the Grade 2 star listed 17 South Street. Consequently, we have focused on the heritage of the site, and we have plotted the age and historic significance of each building within the site and its component parts, such as internal walls, staircases, and character features. This has allowed us to appreciate which parts of the site are important and must be retained and restored, and which parts can be removed or adapted to accommodate the development. As well as this heritage understanding, our work also includes the analysis of the wider site and surrounding area, such as vehicular and pedestrian access, views into and from the site, privacy of neighbouring houses, and ecological and arboricultural constraints. Next slide, please. The underlying principle of the proposals is to restore and conserve the listed buildings and the elements of the site that positively contribute to the conservation area. This is achieved through their adaptation and reuse as residential apartments. Our proposals include the removal of less sensitive alterations that date from the late 20th century, both internally and with the removal of the modern single-storey extensions to the rear of the site. Using archival research, the internal rearrangement of the buildings will seek to restore historic room proportions, reinstate staircases and hallways, and re-establish active front doors onto South Street. Next slide, please. Removal of the poor quality 20th century additions to the rear of the site improves the setting of the historic buildings that front onto South Street and allows for more residential and visitor car parking on the site. Private and shared amenity space is provided and refuse and bicycle storage. The landscaped walled garden that spans from the rear of number 11 South Street south to the rear of number 17 will be retained and preserved as a shared garden. The frontages onto South Street will be retained and relatively unaltered. Existing historic windows, doors, facades, and details will be restored. Pedestrian access will be maintained by the existing access route from South Street between numbers 7 and 9. The existing vehicular access from the east via Millview Meadows and Millview Court will also be retained. There is no new build development proposed on the site at 3 to 15 South Street. More the careful and sensitive conversion and adaptation of the existing buildings. Next slide, please. So, in summary, the outline proposals provide 20 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments. 35% of the dwellings will be affordable. On-site car parking is provided for residents and visitors, and secure bicycle and motorbike storage is also provided. The adaptation of existing buildings to accommodate new uses is fundamentally sustainable when compared to a whole site redevelopment. Whilst the heritage significance of the existing buildings and the wider conservation area will of course be respected and prioritised, the selection of low carbon and low energy materials, improvement of thermal insulation within external walls and roofs, use of renewable sources for heating, and where possible, solar panels to generate electricity on site, will all contribute to an environmentally and historically sensitive development. Next slide, please. Number 57 is located in a prominent location at the southern end of South Street, opposite the busy junction with Bradley Way and Southend Road. The site and the existing building within it has been vacant for many years. It is in close proximity to the River Roach, and consequently, the site is within flood risk zone 3. This means it is liable to flooding. Next slide, please. The objectives of the redevelopment of 57 South Street are to regenerate through residential development, providing housing that meets local needs. The redevelopment must address and deal with the flood risk that presently restricts the way the site can be used. Next slide, please. Understanding the key opportunities and constraints of the site directly informs our outline proposals. The existing building is not listed, but the site is located within the Rochford conservation area, and as I've mentioned before, adopts a prominent gateway position to the town. The existing building is in a poor condition and accommodates the southern portion of the site, with the northern 2/3 being predominantly left to overgrown hard standing. The site has an existing vehicular access from South Street, and the site demise includes 8 parking spaces accessed across the fire station forecourt. Indeed, a number of these are in use by Rochford Fire Station themselves. The trees to the rear boundary are in a poor condition, and therefore their removal and replacement through a suitable replanting strategy would be beneficial. The site's surroundings combine a number of different use classifications, with residential dwellings to the north and northeast, commercial uses to the northwest, and the fire station and industrial units to the south and east. Next slide, please. Whilst options to restore and convert number 57 South Street have been explored, the risk of flooding to the site severely compromises the use of the existing building, and therefore the viability of its retention. The demolition of the existing building will allow a new residential development that can address and overcome the flood risk issues. Despite its current condition, we appreciate that the existing building at number 57 does contribute to the character of the conservation area. Therefore, any replacements must be of a very high quality and appropriate and sensitive to its surroundings, with particular recognition of the site's prominent location. The scheme will preserve the parking capacity for the fire station and provide residential and visitor car parking spaces on site. Some of these residential spaces are undercroft spaces that are located at ground level beneath the rear part of the building. Next slide, please. The outline scheme proposals include a two-storey development to the north and east, with rooms within the sloping roof at second floor. A three-storey element that draws inspiration from the Georgian and Victorian houses further north along South Street articulates the corner of the site and its prominence on the street scene. Next slide, please. In summary, the current proposals provide 8 new residential dwellings at a mix of 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. The scheme responds to the flood risk constraints on the site by elevating the habitable ground floor levels and keeping the actual footprint of the building, where it touches the ground, as small as possible. Car, bicycle, and motorbike parking is provided for both residents and visitors. The outline proposals for number 57 South Street provide a development that is an exemplar in the quality of both internal accommodation and external appearance that this prominent gateway site demands. Thank you. And back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Peter. That was a very detailed presentation with an awful lot of facts and figures and information that, of course, will be available after this presentation for you to reflect and look at particular points of interest to you. So thank you very much indeed, Peter. I'm now going to move on to the next part of the presentation, where we're going to welcome both George and Matt to deal with various aspects. George will start with details of the overall benefits of the asset delivery programme and how the ongoing and updated information can be viewed by the public on both the RDC and Voyage websites, and perhaps most significantly, how you, the general public, can personally engage in this process. Matt will join in with any specific details from an RDC's perspective. Thanks.
Mike, evening, everyone. If I may just jump in there, I'm going to lead this part of the presentation, actually. If I may, thank you, Mike. I'm sure George will join us as we go through.
That's absolutely fine. Carry on.
Thank you. Evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening for the first webinar. I'm going to touch on three areas this evening, as Mike set out. So the benefits of the proposals, some social value considerations, and also the next steps. Just starting with benefits of the proposal, some of those have been touched on already this evening, but I do want to just go into a bit more depth on this. In terms of those benefits, a key area I'd like to touch on is financial sustainability. The council undertook a detailed business case some time ago, and that demonstrated that the proposed scheme would be more cost efficient than continuing to operate the existing buildings in their current form, essentially due to their age, their layout, and the need for continued investment to ensure they were suitable for modern working practices. Andrew actually touched on this in her introduction. Put simply, considering the whole programme, doing the minimum was more expensive in the longer term. Second thing I want to touch on is one regarding improved community facilities. It's a key message, I think, and I've seen some messages coming on the chat function we'll certainly pick up later, but it is a key message to pick up. The existing freight house will be refurbished to provide modern, high-quality community facilities for the whole community and the wider district to benefit from as hireable, agile, modern space. It'll be flexible, efficient space, enabling civic meetings to be held, but also community activities as they currently do. It will be an improved, refurbished facility. The proposed new extension, which Peter set out in his presentation, that will provide the operational and administrative services, ensuring that the workforce can operate in a modern and efficient way and continue to deliver the services I know that our residents rely on. Final point on this slide is regarding the retention and restoration of community assets. And again, it's something Peter touched on in his presentation, but it really is important for us from members, from officers of the council as a whole. And I know from a community perspective, it's something we do hear from the community in terms of the importance of these assets and their function as a whole. So the programme will see the retention and restoration of the listed properties within the Rochford conservation area. And the proposals will be sensitive to the historical nature of the assets. As an example, to the rear of South Street, we're taking great care to retain the historic walled garden and the mature trees to the rear of that site. At the Freight House site, we also want to make more of the fantastic green open space adjacent to the windmill and provide an improved access to that space from the refurbished Freight House and new extension. And we're also, of course, looking to bring forward the regeneration of the vacant and quite constrained site, 57 South Street. It's in a key position in the town. I feel as a project, it's a key opportunity for us to bring that site forward as well. The development of the Freight House, as I said, will be sensitive and it will also be sustainable. It will deliver improved energy performance and also reduce carbon footprint at the site. In terms of the residential developments, and Peter's touched on some of this, we will bring forward high quality, sustainable town centre accommodation, and that will contribute to local housing need, including affordable and social housing, meeting or overachieving on the council's policy. Can I have the next slide, please? Moving on to social value, it's been a key theme since the early part of the programme. And essentially by social value, this is how we can deliver wider social, economic and environmental benefits through the programme. We set out the importance of this right from the early stage, the early stages of the programme, and GB Partnerships as our partner have responded very positively to this, and I'm sure Peter and George will come in later on the presentation to talk more about it. When we talk about social value, essentially we're looking at skills and employment, for example, bringing forward apprenticeships and work placements as a result of the developments. We're also considering our local supply chain. How do we source locally, for example? We're also considering how we protect the environment through sustainable solutions and energy efficient developments. And perhaps most rewarding of all, engaging local schools, social enterprises, businesses and groups to ensure they have an opportunity to engage in the programme. Next slide, please. So on the final slide from myself, as Angela set out in her introduction, this is the pre-application engagement process, and we want it to be meaningful, and we encourage residents to complete the questionnaire via the link on the screen, and also to engage with the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. The engagement survey is now live, and it runs till the 28th of Feb. Council wasn't set out how important engagement was to the programme, and I would certainly echo that. We do welcome your feedback, and it will help shape the programme. I do hope the information has been useful this evening. I appreciate there's been quite a lot of information, certainly through Peter's detailed presentation. We've tried to keep it concise, but further information is available on the Voyage website. And I would encourage everybody to log on to that website and to check it for further updates as the programme develops and evolves. Mike, that completes my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much indeed. George, did you want to add anything from your perspective to Matt's presentation?
Thanks very much, Mike. No, I would just emphasise the fact that, you know, we are really reaching out to the community to gain their feedback, and I would just like to encourage people to visit the website and to comment, because all comments will be read and thoughts will be incorporated into the designs as we move forward. But other than that, I'm happy to move on to the Q&A session.
George, thank you very much indeed. I hope that you found all these presentations very illuminating, and you may have a number of questions. Don't forget, it is not too late to send in a question. Even if we do not have time tonight, every question will receive a response. And I'm sure that my fellow panelists will be able to include any questions that they've seen from the chat functions while this webinar has been in process. I'm going to go through the questions now and invite one of my fellow panelists to respond, but equally any of the other panelists who have some meaningful input, please feel free to join in. So if we look at the questions that we've received so far to date, I noticed that a number relate to car parking at the various sites. So let's start there. This is probably one for Matt and Angela, but others can respond as well. The general questions are along, can you please give details of the electric car charging points at the residential sites? Will each resident have their own allocated space? And perhaps this one's for Matt. Will there be enough parking spaces for staff and visitors at the extended and refurbished freight house? And will there be any cost? Thank you.
I'm happy to come in first, actually, Mike. Give Angela and Matt a chance to gather their thoughts on that one. But as far as the car parking is concerned, then we look to provide a minimum of one space per dwelling. At 3 to 15, for example, there are 24 spaces for the 20 apartments that Peter itemised earlier. At number 57, then there are 10 spaces for the 8 apartments. So you can see that there is also some space for visitors as well. Do you want me to comment on the electric vehicle charging provision?
Yes, please, George, with the RDC officers able to do so as they wish.
Yeah, I think as far as the electric vehicle charging provision is concerned, then we want to provide as much charging facilities as possible. The biggest issue actually is where the supply to the site is currently insufficient for all spaces. Over time, clearly that situation will change as electric vehicles become more popular. And I think whilst we have the current circumstances, then a reasonable target is for us to provide, say, 50% of the spaces with charging points. But what we would definitely do is to future-proof all of the locations by providing the trunking to every space for later conversion, because that is where a lot of the cost actually comes, and a lot of the disruption in the provision of the facilities at a later date.
Thank you, George. Matt, did you want to comment on the specific question about enough parking spaces for staff and visitors at the Freight House? Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Will do. I think it's a really good question, and parking is always top of the agenda when considering these things. I think considering the new ways of working as a council, we're looking at in terms of more agile, flexible working that many people obviously are looking at currently, even before COVID. We will have less staff on site. We're working more flexibly, more agile way. So at any one time, there'll be less staff on site because more will be working in a more flexible way. So there will be less staff parking potentially at the site. But other analysis has shown that there is capacity at our car park to enable us to continue for our community use and our staffing use at that site. So I think we can be confident that there is a plentiful supply for community use at the site to continue.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, well, let's cover that one. Moving on to the next question then, one close to my heart, which is heritage related, and it's perhaps that one that Peter can start off with a response. And the questions I merge into one, please. Will the existing external appearance of 3 to 15 South Street be maintained? Will this be a high quality development, and will residents have any outside space? And secondly, and I know this was mentioned in the presentation, but I'll mention it anyway. Secondly, why are you building flats 57 South Street on a flood zone? Peter, can you start, please?
Yes, thanks, Mike. So firstly, on 3 to 15, the question about external appearance. As I set out in the presentation, the external appearance of 3 to 15, particularly the elevation that fronts onto South Street, is considered highly significant, both because it is the elevations of a number of listed buildings. Four of those buildings are listed. But in addition, it characterises that part of South Street and contributes to the character of the conservation area. As a consequence, changes to that front elevation will be extremely minimal. If anything, the changes will be simply to restore where there are potential sort of defects in the condition, such as repairing of window frames, restoring and repairing fascia boards and roof details and so on. So any sort of changes to that front elevation will be, as I say, extremely minimal. The changes to the development to the rear are more substantial. However, they purely relate to the 20th century infill that sits between sort of two-story elements at the back. That is partly the porter cabin reception area that Angela mentioned earlier, and also in between the porter cabin and the rear elevation of the listed buildings is a separate single-story extension as well. The proposals are to remove both of those, and with input from our heritage consultants and also conversations with the Conservation Officer on behalf of Rochford District Council and Essex County Council, that removal is supported as being an enhancement of the setting of the listed buildings. So hopefully that reassures you that certainly the elevations onto South Street will remain as they stand. Indeed, they'll be improved through careful restoration of the key elements of those elevations. And then, sorry, Mike?
No, you carry on.
I think that was the main question for 3 to 15. Was there a follow-up for 3 to 15? I know we can move to 57.
Not unless any of our RDC colleagues want to add any input from their perspective.
Mike, could I just add that?
Of course, George.
On each and every site, we have done a full heritage assessment and commissioned an independent report, and it's on that we then base Peter and his colleagues base their designs, those designs are then consulted upon, which is what we're going through at the moment, and consulted with the council's advisors. So recently Peter had a walk around of 3 to 15 in particular, and there was identified a stairwell that was of note from a heritage perspective, and therefore that is being retained. So, you know, this is how the designs evolve really, and take into account all of the heritage aspects.
Thank you, George. Thank you. If we can now move on, please. I have a number of questions as they specifically relate to the Freight House, please, possibly for Peter and Matt to answer, and any other colleagues as appropriate. Specific questions have been include: what will the floor area be? Will public events still be held there? What is the capacity and flexibility within the premises? Another question was, there is a current issue with the acoustics, the poor acoustics in the Freight House. Will that be improved with the new build? And finally, another specific question from one of the attendees this evening. I attend a weekly yoga class, and I understand there are no plans for the resumption of sessions, irrespective of changes in lockdown arrangements. Why can classes not be run? Who wants to start off with that?
I'll start, Mike, if I may, and then I'm sure Peter might jump in as we go through. I mean, just to reassure residents and everybody listening this evening, as I said earlier, the community spaces we currently have will be retained and will be refurbished and improved and will be available to be hired. That's fundamentally what will happen, and that's a really important message. So when we're looking at, and Peter will confirm the sort of layout specifically, but the proposals we've shown, and they're still being developed. But for example, the Great Eastern Room in broad terms will remain as it is in terms of its size, its broad size, its capacity. So absolutely those events can continue. That yoga class that was mentioned can continue. The other sessions can continue. But more than that, I think it will be an improved, refurbished space is what we'll be looking at. We'll be investing into that building for the community, essentially. Acoustics was mentioned. Having been the facility a number of times myself, I'm aware the Great Eastern Room is challenging from an acoustic perspective. That was in the brief right from an early stage, working with George and Peter and colleagues to have to look at how we combat that. So again, how can we encourage even greater use through an improved acoustic solution. So yes, absolutely, that's being considered. But fundamentally, from our perspective, key message from myself is yes, it's available for the community. We're going to refurbish it. It'll be available for use, and we absolutely welcome and the community to continue using that building in a much better offer, refurbished facility. Peter, did you want to add anything further to that?
Yes, I can do. Thanks, Matt. Just to be a little more specific, really, and add the sort of detail to that. So the area, the sort of floor area of the Freight House, as it currently stands, as the existing building, is 980 square meters. The area of the new build that we're adding, and this is the total area, both the ground and first floors added together, so what's called the gross internal area, is 830 square meters. So the total area of the building will become just over 1,800 square meters in size. The area of the function spaces within the Freight House will not change. So the footprints of the Great Eastern Room and the two smaller function rooms, the one at first floor up on the mezzanine, and the smaller room that's at the southern end of the Freight House, or towards the southern end, they're all remaining as the existing area that they are. So in terms of capacity, there is no loss or detriment to the capacity of those rooms. But the refurbishment does give us the opportunity to improve the quality of those rooms. It also offers us the opportunity to improve the accessibility of those rooms so that they can be accessed independently. They can have their own access to supplementary spaces and improved kitchen and catering spaces. But the key point about acoustics is a really good one. And it does pose a challenge to us as designers. The building is a valuable piece of industrial heritage. And part of understanding that heritage is the quality of the space inside, the finishes of the interior walls, which is fair-faced brickwork, and the visibility and openness of the roof space above. And whilst that gives a great character to the space and allows us to understand the history of the building, it does pose some challenges in terms of acoustics. So what we need to do is think about how can we retain the quality and the character of the space, but create a space that is acoustically versatile, that accommodates a number of different functions, from music, speech, drama, sports, all the different things that might happen in there. And each of those have slightly different acoustic requirements. So the strategy at the moment is to include an acoustic improvement that also includes the thermal improvement of the building. And that's largely looking at the roof, still retaining the openness and the visibility of the trusses that are there. That's very much a part of the character of the space. But in between those trusses, lining the underside of the roof to allow us to improve the insulation and keep heat within the building and allow the space to be heated efficiently and the environment to be comfortable, but also to apply absorbency within that lining so that the reverberation of sound within that room and within the other rooms can be managed. There's also obviously proposals for when the room is converted into a council chamber and any other spaces or uses of the space that require acoustic enhancement, then obviously audio-visual equipment can be provided, which obviously will enhance the use of speech within the space. So hopefully that provides you with a bit of detail.
Peter, thank you for that detailed response. I'm conscious of time, but I'm also conscious that I've got 4 very important questions I'd like to try and cover if I possibly can, please. So if the panelists can give brief responses to the following. Moving on to a very important question regarding the environment, please. Perhaps this is something that both Angela and George can have a response to. Environmental sustainability is one of the key elements to any and all large-scale projects such as this. What are the initial and ongoing environmental benefits that this project will deliver? Who wants to start?
Like me to go? Do you want to go first, Angela, or would you like me?
Thank you, George. I'll talk sort of in the general, and perhaps you can pick up any specifics. It was really important for us that we built in environmental issues from the get-go. It was one of the key issues that we tested throughout the procurement process. The council has a commitment to carbon neutrality, and we also recognise the importance of environmental sustainability for creating a future legacy of the council. So it made sense to make sure that those environmental concerns were built in from the beginning, and whether that's in relation to materials and also that will deliver environmental sustainability in terms of maintenance and repair, as well as in the operational state, and through to things, as you've already heard from Peter, in relation to solar panels and electric vehicle charging points. So, George?
Yeah, on the specifics, I mean, next month we'll have a chance to talk more about the proposals for the Mill Community Centre, where we've got an excellent opportunity to create an exemplar sustainable building from scratch. But there are more challenges sometimes with converting existing buildings, especially listed buildings. But we take each site on a sort of case-by-case basis and provide a sustainability strategy for each of the sites. And clearly we're moving towards low carbon fuels with electricity as the primary fuel source. I won't bore you too much with the details, and Mike is keen to move us along, but what we're talking about are air source heat pumps, feeding radiators or underfloor heating, together with a mechanical ventilation. We would also be looking at solar panels where possible, without, again, disrupting the roof line. So, for example, at 3 to 15, then you wouldn't see the solar panels. If they were visible from the street, we wouldn't be putting them up. So that's probably all that I need to say. Is it's right at the top of the agenda, and we will be introducing the best sustainable solution in each case.
Okay, thank you, George. Anybody else want to add anything on that? Moving on then. You must expect a COVID-related question, so here it is. Perhaps Matt and George and Angela will have an input on this particular one. Has COVID affected this programme? What changes have been made since inception? And are your timescales achievable and realistic? Subject to formal planning agreement, when do you propose to start work on the South Street and Freight House developments? And how do you plan to mitigate any disruption during the building works? Who wants to start? George?
Angela, you go first.
Well, I was going to say, shall I
first.
touch on the COVID piece, and then perhaps, George, you can pick up the details of the programme. Of course, COVID has taken everybody by surprise this past year. And so we clearly have learned lessons from our virtual working environment that we are operating at present. But it's fair to say that the constraints and the restraints within which we're working at the moment are not at all how we would wish to work. But nonetheless, one of the guiding features for the floor plate of the extension to the Freight House was in relation to the number of council offices that would need to be accommodated, and that includes not just working stations but also meeting rooms, collaboration spaces, interview rooms, and places for the public to meet with officers. And we knew that the work that we had done in relation to our accommodation at South Street was that we were over provisioned. So we have gone from a ratio of essentially 11 desks or desk spaces to every 10 employees, to one where we're looking at 7 for every 10 employees, and we are encouraging our staff to operate a mobile and flexible agile working policy, which enables them to connect from home and from other places where they can touch down. And one of those key places will be the new community centre in Rady. So it enables a peripatetic workforce, and many of our employees are out in the district working with residents and with businesses. And so work is something that you do rather than somewhere that you go. We are keeping that under review in terms of COVID and how that will operate, and the lessons that we've learned in terms of how well equipped we are to manage that. And so we have a transformation program, a digital transformation program, which is running alongside this asset delivery program, which will enable digital technology to assist officers and members to respond to an agile working environment. George.
Excuse me. I think that COVID, the impact has been one of a massive challenge to the programme rather than a delay to the programme. And we've all had to adapt to a new way of working, and indeed, not just working, forming a partnership through virtual media rather than across the table, which would be more normal in this sort of programme. But with, you know, a lot of effort and goodwill, then we have remained on track and on programme over the last 12 months. I think that specifically we've recognised the challenges in operating the current Mill Arts and Entertainment Centre, for example, which means it lays dormant, albeit that it's used as being used as a vaccination centre at the moment. And what we have agreed with the council is to bring forward that particular part of the programme by 9 months. So assuming we can manage to do that, then that will be a success. And so all of that being said, there are many challenges ahead for all of us, but we've got every intention of remaining firmly on track and on programme.
George, thanks very much indeed.
Well, there were some other parts of the question though, Mike, weren't there? I can't recall it all.
It was a case of subject to formal planning agreement. When do you propose to start work on the South Street and Freight House developments? Okay,
so the intention on the current programme for 57 South Street, for 19 South Street, for Freight House and for Civic Suite is to commence construction in the final quarter of this year. The exception to that is 3 to 15 South Street, because that is the one that will continue to be occupied by the council whilst the new Freight House is delivered. The Freight House itself will take approximately 12 months, at which time the council will decant into the new Freight House, and we will commence to work on 3 to 15.
Thank you. Just very briefly, the other point was, how do you plan to mitigate any possible disruption during the building works?
I mean, where there's potential for disruption, for example, at the mill, then we're very aware that there is ongoing activity, for example, for people using the windmill, and we will, make sure that activity can proceed as normal.
Good. I'm fairly certain that will be a question raised at the next webinar in March, George. I know we're running slightly over time, but I hope you'll give me permission. I do have one final, very important question, if I can, please. We haven't yet mentioned the most important aspects of any project, which are the financials. This one is possibly for Angela and other colleagues, but what impact will the overall cost of the project have on the council finances? How much will this project cost, and how will it be repaid? That's a good one. Who wants to take that one then, Angela?
I think that's me. So Mike, you'll appreciate that there is quite a lot of detailed calculations that sit behind this, and that's in our outline business case, which is published and freely available for those people who want to get involved in the level of detail. But it's to remind people that the programme is cross-funded. So in other words, the receipts obtained from the development of the sites funds the additional work that is done at the Freight House, with some additional injection of capital for the Mill Hall new community centre. As things currently stand, and I am talking in sort of round numbers because, again, as you will appreciate, we are not yet at that stage where we have a finite cost model, because we're still at these early engagement steps. The additional net contribution from the council is £1.5 million, in the region of £1.5 million, and that sum is exclusively as a result of the additionality of the enhanced mill site. The savings that the council will make by achieving this programme is approximately £250,000 a year, and so that makes for a payback period of about 6 years in terms of a payment by the council. So the council would expect to see its net revenue budget therefore not impacted. If we were not doing this programme, we would expect to see our net revenue budget increase by £250,000 per year, and the fund for the capital sum is, as things currently stand, projected to be paid from our reserves. But we have calculated our business case on the premise that if we had to fund from the Public Works Loan Board, that we could in fact do so. So it is a very much a worst case scenario.
Angela, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm afraid to say that time has beating us, and if my phone would stop ringing, and I'll bring the meeting to a close before I finally pass on to Councillor Wootton to say the final few words. I do hope that you found this webinar very interesting and informative. There's been an awful lot of information which you'll take time to digest. Can I please remind everybody that it's not too late to have your views, your questions and your observations on any aspect of this massive undertaking. Your voice will be heard and your question will be dealt with. Please try and attend the webinar dealing with the proposals for Rady on the 17th of March and help make your contributions ahead of the final decisions. For my part, I'd just like to thank all the panellists, to Paul Wilkins and colleagues from Azuro Marketing, to Nikki Dawn and others at both RDC and GB Partnerships who've helped in the background to this evening's event. So thank you very much indeed, and I'll let Councillor Simon Wootton have the last word. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Mike, and thank you also to all my colleague panellists. Certainly you seem to be an extremely popular man tonight, because your phone is obviously red hot with someone trying to get hold of you. Thank you indeed. You've done an absolutely superb job, because it's not the easiest environment in which to capture questions which have been submitted beforehand and during the webinar itself. It is difficult. But what I would like to say is those questions have been captured as we're going along. I picked up a few notes myself that there's a little bit of frustration that some of them haven't been directly answered, but they will be captured, they will be answered, and the answers will appear on the Voyage website. So, because I think there's a number of key points there. So thank you to everyone who has taken time out tonight, to the wider audience, for attending and the valuable contribution. Your interest really is appreciated. There's certainly food for thought tonight. A number of points have been raised, which, to be fair, have been discussed in the past, but it's interesting to see that your focus is our focus as well, from the point of view of Rochford Council. The webinar is now going to be shared, and ongoing feedback continues to be welcomed, and that is done via the Voyage website, or alternatively you can write to Voyage at the council offices in South Street in the usual way you would send a letter or contact the council. So it just remains for me to remind you that 17th of March is the next one of these webinars. I think it's gone extremely well tonight, but certainly possibly we can learn lessons on how to make it work even better on the 17th of March. And thank you very much indeed to everyone, and have a good rest of your evening. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.